But let's look at Sergeant Slaughter as a whole, okay, and what he's meant to wrestling. Take that gimmick as it is and put him into what you know of Sergeant Slaughter. You know him as a guy who he was a main eventer. He was a guy who kind of transcended what the wrestler was because he also moved into the acting world, but then came back, had a massive run, worked backstage. Kind of talk about Sergeant Slaughter, Bob Remus, as he is and what he means to the wrestling business.
Yeah, well, I mean, huge. I remember as a kid going to the Pittsburgh Civic Arena when he first came to the old WWF. He had the Cobra Clutch, and nobody could break it. And every week somebody new would try, and then finally Pat Patterson, who was doing the color commentary at the time, said he thought he saw a weakness, and it gets in there, and this whole segment was played up just so perfectly well. He'd go to lock it in, and Patterson's waiting, and Slaughter would break off and go and say he has grease on him or whatever. He finally locks it in, and man, I'm telling you, you go back and watch that segment. Patterson is fighting like a monster to get out of that thing. It hardly looks fake, and he finally runs to one of the turnbuckles and pushes himself off, and they both fall backward. And when they hit the mat, take the bump, the hold gets released. And so that became the big thing, and they took that match around all the place and did what was called a boot camp match. And it was sort of like what we would call a hardcore match today.
Right.
They beat the hell out of each other all over the Pittsburgh Civic Arena, and Slaughter got all colored up, when he took his boot off, and Patterson took it from him. Slaughter, especially for a big guy, he's a big boy. Especially back when he was younger, he was a really big guy. And he could move around that bastard. He had, we used to call him Twinkle Toes because he could move so fluidly around the ring. And, prior to that whole thing in the WWF, when he was in the NWA with Don Cornoodle and they were the tag champs, go back and watch some of those matches they had with Jay Youngblood and Steamboat.
Yeah.
And just a phenomenal worker for a big guy. And, so when I hear people today saying, I don't want to just see two big guys go out there and sell a tackle or whatever. When I hear big guys, when I think of good big guys, I think of the Bam Bam Bigelows, the Vaders, the Slaughters, guys like that could wrestle their asses off. And, after that, you talk about Slaughter's run after when he came back and was an agent. Here was a guy who had, decades in the business, knew how to portray a character, knew how to tell a story in the match. Slaughter, for being just a gimmick guy, what a lot of people consider a gimmick, he really knew how to tell a story in the ring. And so to have people like that in the dressing room as agents that had those decades of experience and could imbue that knowledge down to the younger kids like me when they'd watch your matches and, sometimes pick them apart and tell you what you did right, what you did wrong, that was invaluable. I mean, you couldn't put a price tag on how valuable that was to the young guys like me trying to learn the craft. And now we've seen that sanitized out. What I'm hearing from a lot of the people that I know that are working for different companies is that the kids don't listen today. They don't want to hear what you have to tell them. And I think to myself, if I'm in the NFL, if I come in today as a rookie and I'm a quarterback and a guy named Ben Roethlisberger or Tom Brady comes, hey, kid, let me give you some pointers. I'm a goddamn fool if I say, get out of here. You can't teach me anything. What the hell can you guys teach me? What do you have, 8 or 9, 10 Super Bowls between you? No, you can't teach me a thing. Slaughter was great at that. He was one of the agents that you like to work with. He was a no bones bullshit type of guy. If you fucked up, he let you know you fucked up. But I was completely used to it. We've all heard my stories about Bill Watts, so I wanted to be told when I had screwed something up, so I could learn not to do it again. But he's had the gamut of of the overarching career. The guy drawing money, the guy being the top heel when the whole Iraq War thing broke out. Later, an agent, the cartoon, all of that stuff. He had a pretty significant career. The question I have is, and I don't know the answer to this, but as these people apparently had an off day and nothing else to attack, so we're going to go after Slaughter being a pretend U.S. Marine Corps guy. I'm pretty sure that Slaughter has done a lot of work to raise money for veterans' causes.
Oh, huge.
Yep.
So like you said, don't just pick out the one thing and say, okay, now we're going to attack you because, take the over and under. I'm sure for any of those causes that he raised money for, the veterans that those causes help, I'm sure those veterans could really care less if he's pretending to be a military guy on television in a thing called professional wrestling.
We interviewed him in 2016, I want to say, John. You have your records, 2016, and it was promoting a veterans night at a minor league ballpark here in Virginia.
There you go.
So it had to get rescheduled because it was actually, and you probably were traveling this weekend, the FAA had to shut down planes from, I think it was New York to like South Carolina or something, or Georgia. It was some massive outage with the FAA. So he couldn't fly out of North Carolina, so he was stuck. And they had to reschedule it. But you should have seen the crowd of military people outside this venue, because where I am in Virginia, we're not far from Fort Belvoir, which is a huge base, right outside Washington, D.C. But the crowd of people that were there, that were veterans or military service people that were there to see him, insane. And to attack a guy like that, it's like, that's why I've always said there's too much of a blurred line now where I don't think the fans today think that it's fake. I think that they think it's all real, and I think that they take it too seriously.
Well, it's again virtue signaling, right? I've got to prove to my friends that I'm way up on the pedestal and better than them. So I'm going to find something and hone in on it. Again, if the veterans aren't upset about it, if he's not breaking the letter of that law, and again, I can't imagine that he is, being the fact that he's a fake pro wrestler, and I hate just using that word to be very overt about it.
Yeah.
And he's been doing this on television for 40 years or longer, at least since the 70s, I know.
72.
So 72 till now, that's what, let me do my Jethro Gazintas, a long time. And he's, I don't think that back in the 70s or 80s or 90s or early 2000s, I don't think there was anybody in the building sitting there really going, I think this guy was really in the Marines. And again, it's just, the snowflakes, stop being snowflakes, God. I mean, stop this. This is, you make yourself look really, really idiotic if you're going to pick on something like this for a guy that's raised money for years for charitable causes for veterans. And again, it's a thing called professional wrestling. Well, what's next? Oh my God, there's all this fake blood on these horror movies. And, I don't know. It's where does it end? It's insane. If I had been in a coma for the last 10 years and I woke up today and you're telling me this story, I would swear to God above that you were lying to me, that you're making this shit up. You got to be, because it is so retarded.
Oh, gee. Well, now we're going to get kicked off the airwaves.
There we go.
Oh, that's it. That was the final episode of the Triple Threat Podcast. Let's see.
The AI algorithms just threw the franchise off. That's it.
But hey, he was also, I'll give you another great little Sergeant Slaughter stat here, who's really the first guy who told Vince, one of these, with the Hasbro toy licensing deal, did not want to give up the rights to the Sergeant Slaughter character, and him and Vince had a falling out because he wanted to be a G.I. Joe, and Vince said, no, you're a WWF guy, and he was the first guy who was like, well, peace out, I'll see you later.
Hold on, I'm going to see if I can get my hands in to do this. I'm going to set the phone down and give one of these to Slaughter. My kind of guy. Told the Irishman to go fuck off. I love it.
He proved himself to be right, too.
Yeah, absolutely right. And probably made 10 times the money doing it his way and keeping that name. I know from the G.I. Joe thing, I don't know what he made.
Still making money off of it.
Oh, yeah, and ambassador for them, too.
Yep.
Correct. Yeah, smart move.
But they would have come after the Dean. Sorry.
And he kills it at not only like wrestling autograph shows, but like regular ordinary Comic Cons. He kills it, and Chiller Theater and stuff like that, because they know him from G.I. Joe and wrestling.
Absolutely.
So I mean, he's one of the most popular guys for sure. I mean, just
Yeah.
unbelievable legend.
This will blow over as soon as somebody figures out that, one of the Samoan guys aren't really Samoan, but Fijian, or it's going to be that'll be the next big.
We'll get to somebody with a Samoan relation in just a minute here, and the passing the Rock Johnson in 1 minute. But do you remember when Slaughter was coming back? Because that's around the time you got there in 1990, and he was coming back poised to then go on that massive run as the number one heel for about a year and a half.
Yeah, and had again. Remember how I was talking about it? Everything is perspective, and you go back into that Gulf War, and the patriotism that was sweeping the country and stuff. And here is now, United States Marine Corps guy, supposedly his character, joining alliances with Iraq, and he had so much heat. It was incredible.